Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos.
The main character, after dying in his previous life, gets reborn as Destoroyah inside of MonsterVerse. What is he gonna do to Godzilla inside of the MonsterVerse?
Difference without distinction. It did not attack the crew after they abandoned the deck. It opened ammunition. Yes. Vale interrupted. You're assigning intention because it supports your preferred policy. Okafor turned. My preferred policy is not shipping it into a weapons lab. Sato looked down. Vale smiled. There it is. Mercer raised hand. Enough, what can it do? Okafor answered because the question, though incomplete, still mattered. Distributed microcolonies. Juvenile assembly. Material degradation through microoxygen-like chemistry. Memory transfer suspected. Environmental engineering. Freshwater tolerance developing. Adaptive response to weapons. Mercer looked at Sato. Apex agrees. She took a second too long. On capabilities, yes. On intelligence. Evidence supports persistent learning across separated populations. Vale's face hardened slightly. Sato continued. That should change containment. How? Stop exposing it to systems we cannot afford it to learn. Mercer looked toward the Mechagodzilla reference, hidden behind an access layer he knew existed. Such as... Sato did not answer the classified part aloud. Vale did. Dr. Sato's concern is theoretical. Okafor leaned forward. No, theoretical is pretending your facility isn't teaching it every day. The room split. Military wanted actionable threat profiles. Monarch wanted ecology and containment. Apex wanted exploitation. Public health officials, newly included after coastal oxygen loss, wanted to know whether drinking water was safe. That last question changed the room more than Titan weaponry. Monarch had to consider whether the organism could enter freshwater reservoirs. Okafor said brackish adaptation suggested eventual possibility. No confirmed inland population. Yet, the public health director asked for early warning markers. Not attack alarms. Oxygen. Shell proteins. Unusual metal pitting. Behavior around pumps. She wanted systems local labs could use. Mercer objected to releasing signatures that could cause panic. She answered, panic is finding out after a hospital reservoir drops. Okafor supported. For the first time, part of Destoriah's detection profile left classified channels. Coastal Labs received anonymized guidance. Elise Navarro got it and recognized her own work without credit. She did not care. She added a note from experience. If one reading looks impossible, compare location before recalibrating. That sentence spread too. Small institutions became harder to fool. A wastewater operator in another city detected shell residue before a colony fully established. He shut one intake, flushed isolated line with controlled heat. The local cluster died. Destoroyah felt the loss. No dramatic battle. One attentive operator and a protocol. The hive learned humans were distributing knowledge too. A distributed adversary. That was dangerous. It was also familiar. Sealers felt something close to recognition. The better human response did not depend on a general, titan, or corporation. It depended on many people knowing enough to act locally. Exactly what a resilient system should do. If Destoroyah wanted to survive, it would need to outlearn not just centralized weapons, but decentralized attention. That changed strategy. Obvious dead zones became expensive. Smaller oxygen shifts. More hidden farms. Less immediate expansion. The Public Health Advisory slowed the colony's coastal growth more effectively than one military line. Vale hated because it reduced argument for his weapon solution. Okafor noticed. This is working. Mercer said. It isn't stopping it. No. Then working is generous. It bought detection time. Against a thing that keeps changing. Time is what containment buys. Sealers would have agreed. He had died buying time for a dive crew. The colony had inherited that instinct in an unexpected direction. Sometimes survival was not defeating a threat. It was making the next failure happen late enough for someone to notice. Asterisk Chapter 14. The box opens asterisk. The sample split at 03:17. A technician saw one organism become 3 and stepped backward from the microscope. The new bodies did not move randomly. One pressed against the camera port. One climbed the cartridge wall. The third remained still until the room's ventilation changed. Containment foam filled the chamber. It killed the first 2 bodies and trapped the third beneath a hardened layer. Apex technicians celebrated the result, then watched the foam crack from underneath. Microoxygen did not burn through the entire mass. It opened a network of tiny channels. The body escaped into the drain. It carried the room's layout, the pressure of the foam, the chemical composition of the seals, and the sound of the technician who had said successful. The memory crossed the pipes into a larger colony beneath the facility. Vale ordered the drain sealed. The seal was made of composite material designed for Titan containment. It lasted 40 seconds. The escaping organisms did not dissolve the whole barrier. They softened one mounting point and allowed building pressure to do the rest. Apex lost the sample but kept one result. The colony could transmit memory across separated bodies. The conclusion should have ended the weapon program. Instead, Vale marked the finding as an advantage. In the dark beneath the facility, Destoroyah learned the location of the machine hangar from a frightened electrical current. The swarm did not rush the building. It planted a few bodies in the cable trenches and let human secrecy build the road for it. The escaped sample reached a ventilation sump and found traces of coolant. Cold slowed it, but did not stop it. Destoroyah used the delay to compare the compound with the memory of Shimo's distant chemistry, a connection that meant nothing yet, but would matter when the colony reached a world where ice could move like a weapon. The Apex lockdown began with a floor drain alarm. No monster siren. No red emergency lights. A maintenance panel showed flow where the line should have been dry. Dr. Sato saw it and stood so quickly her chair rolled backward. Seal Section C. The control technician hesitated. Vale authorization. Now. He did. 3 fire doors closed. 26 people remained inside the broader research wing. Sato opened the sample room feed. Empty containment chamber. Foam residue. Drain access cracked. How long? A technician answered. 9 minutes since pressure change. Too long. Vale appeared on the internal screen. What did you seal? Section C. Reopen. We have actuator components moving through in 12. No. The room went still. Sato had refused him before in reports. Not live operations. Vale's voice lowered. Dr. Sato. The sample is out. We know. Then you know why the corridor stays closed. The components are sealed. The organism learns seams. Vale looked toward someone off-screen. Sato opened the door. She disabled her console's remote override. That action would end her career if nothing happened. Something happened. A camera in Section C showed a pale line emerge from a drain and cross wet concrete toward a transport cart. Not toward the nearest person. The cart. Synthetic Titan muscle inside. Sato pointed. Still theoretical. Vale stopped talking. The colony reached the cart. Its outer bodies touched a wheel housing. Then withdrew. The wheel had been treated with heat-resistant coating. A second cluster climbed the axle where coating ended. Sato watched with scientific horror. It was testing the protection gradient. Security wanted incendiary foam. No. Why? Cart carries reactive material. Then shoot. Fragmentation spreads it. The technicians looked at her. She had criticized containment for weeks. Now everyone wanted an answer. Sato breathed once. Dry the corridor. The organism needed moisture. Industrial fans. Dehumidifiers. Seal drains from outside section, not inside. Raise floor temperature moderately, not enough to trigger suppression systems. Create one wet path toward an empty containment sump. Allure. Vale said. You want to guide it. I want it to choose the easiest water. They built. The pale line shifted. Slow. Not fooled immediately. The colony sampled dry floor, retreated, sampled again. Then followed humidity. Destoroyah knew something was wrong. The wet route was too clean. No food. No electrical activity. A trap. But the alternative was increasing dryness. He sent sacrificial bodies first. They entered sump. Foam deployed. Died. The main cluster stopped outside. Sato saw. It knows. Security swore. She changed. Instead of killing trap, make exit. Open a narrow drain route back toward external wastewater isolation, where heat treatment could occur without people. Vale objected. You're releasing it. Out of the room, full of Titan components. The choice was ugly. She chose. The colony followed only after testing. It entered the external line. Heat exchangers killed much. Some escaped farther. Facility protected. Containment not absolute. Vale called the operation a partial failure. Sato answered. Everyone went home. 26 people. No exposure injury. No Mechagodzilla components compromised. She accepted the escaped organisms as the cost. Apex public report later said advanced containment systems neutralized the incident. Sato kept the raw timeline. One line. Containment succeeded, where it changed the organism's available choices, rather than attempting to overpower every possible route. Okafor obtained the report months later through a leak. She recognized the thinking. Destoroyah remembered it too. A human had built a path the colony willingly took. Sealers had used similar logic on panicked groups in his first life. Make the safe action the easiest action. Apex had taught the hive something while trying to survive it. Influence did not require command. That lesson would become useful much later against creatures ruled by force. Sato was removed from the Apex project 3 days after the lockdown. Official reason: breakdown of command confidence. She packed one box. Most of her files were copied already. Vale met her at the lab door. You were right about the breach. That's not why I'm leaving. No. You needed me right enough to save the facility and obedient enough not to embarrass the program. Vale's expression did not change. Organizations require command. So do experiments. Experiments also require stopping conditions. You think Monarch is cleaner? No. That answer surprised him. Sato lifted the box. I think every system needs someone who can say stop without losing the right to be heard afterward. She left. Months later, Okafor received an encrypted package. Containment logs. Behavior tests. The failed conditioning proposal. No stolen Mechagodzilla schematics. Only organism-related evidence. Sato included one message. Do not turn this into proof Apex was uniquely stupid. The failure is portable. Okafor read twice. Correct. She entered the logs into the raw archive with source protected. The information improved Monarch's handling protocols. Apex had tried to weaponize Destoroyah. Its dissenting scientist ended up strengthening the institutions trying to survive him. Systems leaked lessons as easily as carriers leaked through drains. Asterisk Chapter 15, Aggregate. The first aggregate form was an accident caused by hunger. 6 juveniles reached the same dead industrial tank and fed on the same mixture of fish waste, batteries, and tissue. Their shells fused at the joints. Their separate legs became one broad foundation. Destoroyah felt the new shape as pressure in every direction. The aggregate had dozens of claws, but the limbs answered to a single rhythm. It could climb the tank wall, spread its weight across a road, and focus micro-oxygen through a reinforced throat. The first step crushed the tank. The second tore the roadway. The aggregate stopped when a human convoy approached and lowered itself beneath the bridge. Its mass could have destroyed the vehicles. Its new intelligence understood that a larger body made a larger target. A Monarch drone found the tracks. Okafor watched the footage and saw no natural animal that could have made them. The stride length changed 3 times in 30 meters. Something had merged, separated, and merged again. Destoroyah learned to keep the aggregate at the center of a ring of smaller bodies. If the large form was damaged, the outer clusters could enter through the cracks and rebuild it. The body was not the colony. It was a tool the colony could wear. By the end of the week, 2 more aggregates had formed beneath the coast. The dead zones connected through drains and seawater. A local infestation had become a body with a coastline for nerves. The aggregates developed different temperaments because their outer tissue experienced different environments. One preferred metal and heat. Another stayed near seawater. A third grew a dense shell around its core. Destoroyah kept them separate on purpose, turning variation into a living reserve rather than forcing every body into one design. The first aggregate could not turn around inside the storm tunnel. That nearly killed it. The body had grown where food and metal were abundant, not where movement was spacious. When a Monarch drone entered from one side and military personnel closed the other, Destoroyah discovered the form's width had become a trap. The aggregate tried to reverse. Too slow. The drone shone, a laser rangefinder across its shell. A targeting cue. The colony recognized the preparation from previous machines. It did not have room to dodge. So it came apart. Not from damage. Choice. Outer plates separated. Juvenile clusters poured into wall gaps. The central core flattened against the tunnel floor. The first missile crossed through the space the aggregate had occupied and struck the far wall. The explosion killed thousands. The body as a single form ended. The colony did not. Monarch footage captured the event. Okafor stared. It disassembled before impact. The analyst beside her said, "Reflex. Missile hadn't fired. Rangefinder. It associated." A learned warning cue. They changed drone procedure immediately. No active rangefinder before observation unless firing already authorized. That reduced one queue. Destoroyah would learn others. The escaped clusters reassembled farther down the tunnel. Smaller, narrower. The new aggregate sacrificed raw armor for movement. A second branch retained thick shell for open industrial yards. Variation became planned. Sealers realized something else during reassembly. The body did not need to return exactly. Human instinct wanted repair toward original form. The colony could rebuild toward current conditions. Damage became redesign opportunity. That principle carried danger. If every injury triggered radical change, the hive would lose tested reliability. So the body retained stable core structures, unless the environment proved them wrong repeatedly. Another balance. The three aggregate lines grew distinct names internally, not spoken words, but function patterns. Deep shell, runner, metal eater. The human part translated them because naming helped memory. He did not treat them as separate people. Not yet. Their local experiences were diverging, though. The runner disliked confinement, not emotionally in a human way, but its branch responded earlier to narrowing pressure after the tunnel incident. The deep shell tolerated heat better because it had survived industrial fires. Metal eater preferred electrical fields. Sealers could not tell whether the differences amounted to temperaments. They might instead have been adaptive biases produced by different local histories. The distinction did not matter operationally. Sealers let them persist. Forcing uniformity would erase useful history. The first coordination drill between aggregates occurred beneath an empty freight yard. Runner drew a security drone. Deep shell waited near a concrete support. Metal eater entered a transformer enclosure. When the drone followed runner, Metal eater cut power. Darkness. Deep shell blocked the exit. No human hurt. The drone captured. Destoroyah disassembled it carefully. Camera. Battery. Communication. He left the transmitter mostly intact and sent it drifting into seawater later. Monarch recovered. The device carried shell residue, but no obvious sabotage beyond power damage. Okafor saw the attack pattern. Ambush. The military analyst nodded. Coordinated units. They aren't units if they're one organism. What do you call three bodies performing roles? Okafor had no better operational term. So the reports began saying forms. Not individuals. Not drones. Forms. Language shifted with understanding. Apex preferred assets. Military preferred targets. Monarch preferred manifestations. Destoroyah did not care what humans called the bodies. He cared that they had stopped assuming destroying one meant progress against the whole. Humans were learning faster. So was he. The next aggregate would need to do more than survive a missile. It needed to change the battlefield without presenting a single answer. The three aggregate lineages continued diverging after the freight yard ambush. Runner developed a habit of shedding armor before tight spaces. Deep shell began growing temporary stone-like deposits over old wounds. Metal eater learned to stop feeding when electrical current changed abruptly, a warning that humans had discovered its preference. The hive could have merged every useful trait. It tested one composite. The result was terrible. Too heavy for runner speed. Too metabolically expensive for deep shell endurance. Too insulated to sense electrical gradients well. More abilities had produced a worse body. Sealers dismantled. Specialization survived. The lesson affected greater form much later. A body did not need every trait merely because the colony possessed it. The hive kept a library of forms rather than one evolutionary ladder. When monarch analysts later compared shell samples from separate attacks, they argued whether they were different species. Okafor said, "Different configurations." How no? Because the chemistry has the same memory markers. That answer unsettled the room. Humans were used to individuals inside species. Destoroyah was becoming a species-like intelligence, choosing individuals as equipment without reducing all of them to identical copies. The language remained inadequate. The bodies worked anyway. Asterisk Chapter 16. The balance feels the wound. Asterisk. Godzilla felt the imbalance before humans did. The coastal water had lost too much oxygen, too many fish had vanished, and the chemical wound was spreading along currents that should have carried recovery. The Titan turned from deeper ocean and began moving toward the source. Monarch's satellites saw the change in his route. Okafor received the alert while standing over a map of the dead zones. The room went quiet. The anomaly had been dangerous. Godzilla made it planetary. At the shoreline, the aggregate bodies sensed the approaching pressure through pilings and seabed. The colony did not know the Titan as a name. It knew heat, mass, radiation, and a heartbeat that disturbed the whole shelf. Destoroyah divided the coastal swarm into 3 responses. One group withdrew into deep trenches. One fortified the largest dead zone with biomass and metal. The third remained visible, not as an attack, but as a test of how the Titan chose to approach. Godzilla surfaced beyond the harbor, dorsal plates glowing through rain. The humans evacuated the waterfront. Apex attempted to move its equipment inland. Neither knew that the colony was already inside their roots. The balance had noticed the wound. Destoroyah gathered every body that could survive the coming heat and prepared to learn whether a Titan's power could be eaten or only endured. Godzilla's approach displaced whales and deep-water predators toward the coast. The animals entered the outer farms and became sudden sources of biomass. Destoroyah accepted the gift without allowing the feeding to spread into the evacuation lanes. Even in crisis, territory had to remain legible to the colony. Godzilla changed course 3 times before Monarch admitted he was tracking the dead zones. The first turn looked incidental. The second matched a coastal anomaly. The third ignored a known Titan migration signal and cut directly toward the harbor. Okafor placed his path over oxygen maps. The line connected. Director Hampton watched. He feels it. Yes. How? We don't know. Can the organism feel him? Okafor looked at the radiation spikes recorded whenever Godzilla approached. Almost certainly. 2 systems sensing each other before contact. That made evacuation urgent. It also created a new kind of experiment nobody had permission to run. Sealers had no direct way to know how an apex titan classified an ecosystem-level anomaly. Godzilla answered on his own. He entered a region where the colony had shifted fish populations without fully killing them. He slowed, dived, moved along the boundary. Did not attack. Destoroyah felt the pressure wave and froze, exposed feeding. Godzilla circled once. His body radiated power into water. The colony tasted it from a distance and did not move closer. The Titan continued. Hours later, he reached a true dead zone. Fish absent. Oxygen collapsed. Chemical residue active. His behavior changed. Acceleration. A low vibration traveled through seabed before he surfaced. Not random anger. Threshold crossed. Sealers understood without language. Godzilla tolerated change until it threatened a balance he recognized as unacceptable. That was information. The colony deliberately stopped one dead zone expansion before the Titan arrived. Sealers waited to see whether Godzilla would notice the new stabilization pattern. Godzilla slowed near it, inspected, then moved toward the larger coastal wound instead. The result suggested boundaries could influence his attention. Not control. Influence. Destoroyah could avoid conflict by limiting ecological damage. Or he could redirect Godzilla by creating damage elsewhere. The second idea disgusted the human memory. It also emerged naturally from the hive's strategic calculation. Sealers did not suppress the thought. He marked it dangerous. A capability acknowledged is easier to restrain than one denied. He tested nothing that endangered unrelated populations. Instead, he reduced one farm's oxygen draw and watched. Godzilla passed it. Evidence enough. The colony now knew at least one path to coexist temporarily. Keep alteration below a threshold the Titan interpreted as systemic wound. Hunger opposed. Growth slowed. The choice existed. Then Apex disrupted the equation. Remote weapons were moved into the harbor. Their power systems emitted signals resembling concentrated threats. Godzilla reacted before firing. Destoroyah felt his attention shift toward machines and colony both. Humans had inserted themselves into a relationship they did not understand. Okafor told command, "Pull Apex batteries. They're not ours. Then tell them Godzilla is tracking the power signature." Vale refused. He wanted the Titan near the infestation. If Godzilla attacked, Apex could observe both. Okafor stared at his image. "You're using a city as a test chamber. It's evacuated. Water isn't." Vale ended call. Godzilla surfaced. The colony prepared. Okafor watched from a command aircraft outside likely blast radius. Her screen displayed 3 actors. Godzilla. Apex battery. Dead zone. No one controlled the whole. The first Apex targeting radar painted the aggregate. Godzilla's dorsal plates began to glow. Okafor whispered, "Everybody thinks the shot is theirs." Destoroyah felt the charge. No name. No politics. Heat. Mass. The most dangerous signal yet. He distributed the coastal branches before the breath came. Not because he wanted battle. Because the system above him had removed the quiet option. Chapter 17. The evacuation choice *. Monarch wanted to evacuate 3 coastal cities. Apex wanted the military line moved closer so the Titan's arrival could destroy the infestation in one strike. The argument lasted 11 minutes before Godzilla's roar made every glass wall in the command room vibrate. Okafor looked at the projected dead zones. If the attack misses, the chemical plume reaches the current. Vale answered through a secure screen. If it succeeds, we lose a harbor. If we wait, we lose a coastline. Those are not the only choices. They are the only choices we can afford. Monarch moved civilians inland and left autonomous sensors behind. Apex positioned remote weapons near the largest aggregate body. Each side claimed it was protecting the world. Neither admitted that Godzilla's intervention might also erase their evidence. Destoroyah felt machines enter the outer water and sent sacrificial clusters toward them. The clusters were destroyed by depth charges. The blasts killed fish, broke pipes, and pushed new nutrients into the feeding farms. Human containment had become a delivery system without understanding the exchange. The colony connected the 3 largest aggregates through deep channels. They would not merge yet. A single mass might draw all of Godzilla's attention. Distributed bodies could survive the first breath and choose where to reform. When the Titan's shadow crossed the moonlit surface, Destoroyah stopped feeding. The next lesson would cost more than fish, metal, or soldiers. Apex's remote weapons fired when Godzilla surfaced, striking neither target cleanly. The blasts killed civilians, abandoned animals, and ruptured a fuel tank. Monarch recorded the mistake. Destoroyah recorded the fuel, the fire pattern, and the human willingness to add a third disaster to a fight already too large for them. Evacuation buses left before sunrise. The first city emptied unevenly. People with cars went first. Hospitals took longer. A nursing facility lost one contracted driver because his family had already evacuated inland. Monarch's broad order became 1,000 local problems within minutes. Okafor saw only icons on a map until she asked for municipal feeds. Then she saw wheelchairs lined under rain. Pets left behind. A dialysis center asking whether road be remained open. The language of evacuate 3 coastal cities became unacceptable after that. She assigned a liaison solely to vulnerable facilities. The military commander objected that Monarch's mission was Titan response, not civil transport. Okafor answered, "A Titan response that leaves people in the impact zone is a failed Titan response." Resources shifted. Apex did not change its firing plan. Vale argued the waterfront itself was cleared. Okafor sent him a map of stormwater outflow, hospital intake, fisheries, and fuel storage. The battle zone had consequences beyond people standing on pavement. No response. Destoroyah saw evacuation differently. Traffic vibration moved inland. Human density near the coast fell. Animal density changed too. Dogs, cats, rats, livestock at fringe. The colony could have exploited abandoned food and bodies easily. It did feed on fish stores and waste. It avoided moving into main evacuation roads. Not altruism alone. Godzilla was coming. Dense human movement created unpredictable military response. Still, the restraint preserved lives. A trapped dog on a flooded ground floor encountered juvenile scouts. The animal barked until hoarse. The juveniles moved past toward a battery room. One paused near the water bowl. The dog's breath made oxygen ripples. The body could feed. It did not. Later, a rescue crew found the dog alive and shell residue near the breaker panel. The detail reached Okafor after the battle. Another omission. Pattern. The evacuation itself created a deadly accident when an Apex remote battery fired early. The blast ruptured a fuel tank. Fire spread across water. A bus route inland crossed smoke. Municipal control rerouted. One bus got stuck behind an abandoned checkpoint. A police officer broke the barrier manually. No permission. People lived. Okafor watched logs afterward and saw the same structure repeatedly. Central plans worked only when local people could deviate when conditions changed. Apex's weapon system did the opposite. It awaited remote authorization, even when a ground sensor showed Godzilla outside predicted lane. The shot still launched. Missed primary target. Added fire. Vale blamed targeting noise caused by the organism. Sato, reviewing remotely, marked a different cause. Authorization architecture prevented local abort after environmental state changed. She sent it. Vale rejected wording. She kept it. Destoroyah experienced the strike as heat and pressure. He also felt the human evacuation, lanes through drains. When fuel entered stormwater, the colony could have used current to move inland rapidly. He blocked one branch. The fuel was toxic to developing freshwater-tolerant clusters. More importantly, the current led toward dense human shelter. Attack that would cause escalation with no useful Titan data. The branch diverted into industrial retention basin. A choice made beneath the city, while everyone above assumed the organism followed any path available. Godzilla reached shore. Everything smaller became secondary. Destoroyah stopped exploratory feeding. Reserve clusters buried. Aggregates distributed. Microscopic memory carriers withdrew beyond the immediate radiation zone. The colony entered battle already planning what would remain after the visible body died. Okafor, watching evacuation icons turn green one by one, was doing the human version. Not winning the fight, making sure something survived it. The hospital evacuation became Monarch's model for a different reason. A neonatal unit could not move all patients at once. The hospital administrator refused the city's first blanket order. We need staged transport. A military liaison told her the zone had to be clear in 90 minutes. She answered, then send vehicles that can carry incubators. The argument reached Okafor. She sided with hospital. Specialized ambulances were pulled from farther inland. The unit evacuated last and safely. The city technically missed the first clearance deadline by 22 minutes. Godzilla arrived hours later. No consequence from delay. The after-action review initially listed the hospital as non-compliant. Okafor changed it. Evacuation plan incompatible with patient transport requirements. Local correction successful. Language mattered because future plans would otherwise blame the hospital instead of fixing transport assumptions. The revised template required vulnerable facility inventory before Titan arrival whenever warning time allowed. That bureaucratic change later moved patients before another coastal anomaly without emergency improvisation. Destoroyah never saw those lives. He only felt fewer vulnerable human concentrations near one future dead zone. Systems were changing human behavior outside his sensory horizon. The world was becoming harder to model from direct contact alone. Chapter 18, Atomic Rain. The harbor battle lasted 8 minutes on Monarch's clean timeline. For the people inside it, time broke. Captain Holt's forward observation team occupied a reinforced parking structure 3 blocks from the waterfront. They had orders to record, not engage, unless civilians appeared. No civilians were supposed to remain. At 06:14, a woman ran into the street below carrying a child. Holt swore. Where did she come from? No answer. The evacuation map showed the block clear. The map was wrong. Godzilla's foot came down 2 streets away. Windows shattered. The woman fell. Holt's medic moved before permission. Go, Holt shouted after him. 2 soldiers followed. The aggregate rose behind a warehouse. Everything became scale. The creature was large enough that its limbs changed traffic lanes simply by moving. Shell plates reflected fire. Smaller bodies flowed beneath it like spilled machinery. Godzilla struck. The first impact threw Holt's team against concrete. The medic reached the woman. Child alive. Mother conscious. They dragged both into a loading ramp. Atomic charge began. Every radio shouted at once. Holt looked toward the blue light building between dorsal plates and understood reinforcement meant nothing. Down. The breath erased the warehouse. Air became pressure. The parking structure's outer wall peeled away. Holt lost hearing. When vision returned, the aggregate existed in pieces. He thought the battle was over. Then pieces moved. A severed claw split into crawling forms. A plate lifted because bodies underneath were carrying it. Holt stopped thinking of it as one creature. "Record," he said, though he could barely hear himself. The camera operator was already doing it. Godzilla turned. The reformed body came from behind. Claws around ankle. Apex battery fired. Its projectile struck the road near Godzilla and detonated under the aggregate's outer mass. All three forces collided. Holt saw something humans later debated for weeks. Destoroyah released Godzilla's ankle before the Apex projectile landed. Not because impact forced it. Before, Kong had to decide whether the colony had detected the weapon before he moved. Probably. He also had to consider whether Destoroyah had deliberately avoided using Godzilla as a shield. Unknown. Okafor rewound the frame repeatedly. The timing mattered. Destoroyah's colony had sensed radar power, launch pattern from prior fights. It moved to survive. The result spared Godzilla part of blast. Intent beyond self-preservation could not be proven. The Titan did not care. He slammed the remaining mass through a flooded street. Destoroyah sent microscopic scouts into the blood trace before heat reached. One survived long enough to sample. That tiny event mattered more to the hive than losing the visible form. Godzilla's blood was not ordinary radiation. It carried cellular resilience shaped around energy humans could barely contain mechanically. The colony touched. Withdrew. A small sample. Enough. The medic got the mother and child out during a moment when Godzilla turned seaward. The child kept screaming one word. Bug. Holt almost laughed. A city-scale disaster reduced to a child's category. They reached the observation structure before the next shock. No one in Holt's team died. The report afterward asked whether the unauthorized rescue had compromised mission. Holt wrote, "Yes, necessary." Command requested clarification. He added, the mission existed because civilians were supposed to be absent. Evidence that assumption was false superseded the observation posture. Okafor saved the wording. Apex called the operation compromised. The colony called nothing. It retreated into flooded subway tunnels with radiation traces and damage memory. Godzilla stood in the ruined harbor. He had destroyed most visible mass. His posture changed when no large target returned. Not triumph. Surge. He sniffed water. Moved. The battle had taught him too. Next time, he would not assume the largest body was the whole threat. Destoroyah felt that through his slower, more deliberate pressure patterns, an enemy learning correctly was more dangerous than one hitting harder. The colony entered the tunnels and did not immediately rebuild. It needed to understand what it had stolen before hunger turned information into another mistake. The harbor became a restricted ruin after Godzilla left. Holt returned 2 days later with Okafor and a structural team. No soldiers entered first. A remotely operated crawler went down the flooded street, measuring radiation and oxygen. The machine passed the parking structure where Holt's team had sheltered and stopped beside one of the trenches Godzilla's claws had cut. The camera found no moving colony. It found patterns. Shell residue had gathered along the trench walls in thin bands, each at a different height. Okafor leaned toward the monitor. Those aren't random. Holt looked at the waterlane marks. Flood stages. Sampling stages. The colony had entered the wound after Godzilla moved, withdrawn, returned after radiation fell. then withdrawn again. A record of caution embedded in residue. The crawler collected only from the outermost band. Okafor refused deeper sampling. Why, the operator asked. We have reach. Because if there's live material down there, the arm becomes a bridge. That was the kind of sentence field teams now understood without argument. They moved on. At the fuel tank rupture, dead fish had collected against a retaining wall. Scavengers were already returning. Oxygen remained low but rising. Holt looked across the ruined harbor. How long before people come back? The city engineer answered before Okafor. Months. Because of the organism. Because half the utilities are under the street. That distinction mattered. Titan conflict had broken systems humans needed even after monsters left. Water, power, sewage, roads. Destoroyah's visible body was gone, but the city still paid. Okafor began pushing Monarch to include recovery infrastructure in Titan response models, not only evacuation and combat. The budget people complained that rebuilding was municipal responsibility. Holt surprised her by backing the request. I watched a mother run through an area our map said was empty. He pointed at the cracked loading ramp. Response doesn't end when the kaiju walks away. Monarch funded distributed oxygen sensors during reconstruction. Not classified instruments. Civilian-grade units tied to water utility. The local university hosted data. If one sensor drifted, nearby sensors could compare before automatic recalibration. The harbor became harder for hidden colonies to enter unnoticed. Destoroyah discovered this months later when a carrier approached through a rebuilt culvert. 3 sensors changed together. A local alarm isolated the gate. Heat flushed. The carrier died. Sealers felt the branch vanish. There was no Godzilla. No Monarch strike team. A city had learned. He redirected future carriers around the harbor rather than brute force the system. The destroyed battle site had become a stronger boundary because humans rebuilt with memory. That was a result Destoroyah could respect even while it worked against him. Holt visited once after civilians returned. The child from the evacuation rescue came with his mother to thank the fire department, not Monarch. He saw Holt by chance. Bugman, the child said. Holt looked around. Me. The boy pointed toward harbor. The bug. Not here. The child nodded solemnly. Good. Then ran to look at a fire engine. Holt watched. The world did not end for the child at the harbor. It became a story with a fire truck afterward. That mattered too. Asterisk Chapter 19, A Taste of Radiation. The radiation was not food in the ordinary sense. It changed the colony before it nourished it. Bodies that touched the glowing wound in Godzilla's ankle hardened, split, and reassembled with denser membranes. Their micro-oxygen chemistry reached farther and burned hotter. Destoroyah tested the change on a broken bridge. The new body crossed the metal without dissolving its own supports. It also overheated. The shell cracked from within, and the colony had to flood the form with cold seawater before it killed itself. Godzilla noticed the drain. He slammed his foot into the harbor and sent a wave through the aggregate. The bodies scattered. Several were vaporized by the radiation burst that followed. The survivors withdrew into the flooded subway beneath the city. Inside the tunnel, Destoroyah compared the new memories. Radiation could become structure, but only if the colony controlled the rate. Too much energy made the body unstable. Too little produced ordinary armor. The answer lay in merging energy-hungry tissue with oxygen-dead chemistry. A fragment remained attached to Godzilla's wounded scale. It was too small to threaten him, but large enough to continue feeding between attacks. The Titan moved toward the ocean, carrying a living experiment with him. For the first time, Destoroyah understood that Titans were not merely obstacles. They were moving environments. Their bodies held the power required to leave the microscopic world, and Godzilla had just shown the colony where the key was buried. A radiation-fed cluster attempted to build a second core and failed. The tissue crystallized from the center outward. Destoroyah dismantled it carefully, preserved the stable outer layers, and used the failure to design cooling channels before the next experiment. Progress came from refusing to call a dead body wasted. The first radiation-adapted tissue grew in a subway maintenance pool. There was no dramatic transformation. A thin layer of colony matter held one trace of Godzilla's blood against mineral-rich water and died. The second held longer. The third developed a hardened membrane and overheated from within. Destoroyah disassembled it before rupture. The process became deliberate. Radiation input measured in pulses. Cooling water changed between tests. Microoxygen activity reduced during absorption. One variable at a time where possible. Silas's old engineering habits returned with surprising force. The colony body wanted to merge everything immediately. His memory insisted on knowing which change did what. The two impulses fought. He built parallel test pools. Pool 1, radiation only. Pool 2, radiation plus elevated microoxygen. Pool 3, radiation plus mineral shell. Pool 4, low-dose radiation over longer duration. The slow pool performed best. No explosion. No dramatic armor. Cells simply retained energy without destroying neighboring tissue. Boring success. Sealers trusted it more. The hive spread that structure gradually. Then a juvenile ignored the schedule. A local branch encountered a hot piece of contaminated metal and absorbed too much. The body swelled. Shell glowed. For several seconds, it became stronger than any juvenile yet. It tore through a steel door. Then the core crystallized and ruptured. The explosion killed nearby scouts. Tempting power. Catastrophic stability. Destoroyah marked the phenotype restricted. The hive did not erase. It kept in archive tissue under controlled conditions. The unstable line remained locked behind a requirement for sufficient cooling before any future activation. The human part knew dangerous technologies often survived because someone always believed the next context would justify them. The colony could not simply promise never. It needed barriers. The unstable line could not reproduce freely. Its reproductive tissues were disabled outside designated reservoir. A biological safety interlock. Not perfect. A physical limit was more reliable than trusting a future-hungry branch to show restraint. This was the first time Sealers deliberately limited his own evolutionary path. The decision felt strange. Power was available. He made it harder to reach. Apex would have called waste. Okafor might have called containment. Sealers called it not dying stupidly. The radiation adaptation changed sensory range too. Godzilla's traces became easier to detect. The colony could feel residual energy through flooded tunnels, along seawater, inside damaged concrete. A map of where the Titan had moved. It also began sensing other Titan-adjacent materials in human equipment. Monic samples. Apex synthetic tissue. Ancient fragments. The world was full of energy people had collected without understanding all the connections. Destoroyah could follow. He did not chase every signal. The lesson from Godzilla remained. A concentrated source could kill faster than it fed. The fragment attached to Godzilla's damaged scale survived only minutes. Those minutes were extraordinary. Temperature, pressure, cell regeneration, radiation flux. The tiny colony did not try to burrow deeper. It would die. It sampled outer tissue and released before Godzilla entered deeper water. Most bodies were destroyed by heat. One microscopic carrier detached in time. It returned through current days later. The data changed every radiation test. The Titan's body did not merely tolerate energy. It distributed, regulated, and repaired around it. Destoroyah copied principle, not structure. Energy sinks, layered tissues, sacrificial outer cells, channels that moved heat away from core. The next radiation-fed juvenile stayed stable 10 times longer. Still not enough for true Titan scale. Progress. Sealers remembered his own human body, failing in seconds after the bullet and cold. This body could redesign the concept of injury. Yet every improvement still began with a limit. He found that grounding. Immortality through adaptation would be dangerous if it convinced the hive that nothing could end it. Godzilla had already proved otherwise. Destoroyah kept the memory of atomic fire vivid in every critical branch. Not trauma to conquer, a boundary to respect. Chapter 20, The Price of Greed. Godzilla answered the hidden feeding with violence. He drove into the sea and released atomic breath beneath the surface. The water flashed white. Every cluster near his body died at once, and the shock wave carried burning tissue through the trench. Destoroyah tried to feed through the blast. The attempt was a mistake. Radiation entered too quickly, micro-oxygen reacted with the heat, and entire branches of the hive collapsed into inert crust. The colony felt the loss as a silence spreading through its memory. The survivors fled along the seafloor. Godzilla followed, too large for the narrow trench, but powerful enough to collapse it behind them. Rock sealed roots, water boiled. The colony split again, sacrificing mass to preserve information. One aggregate body surfaced beneath the Titan's dorsal plates and was burned away. Another hid in the wreckage of a submarine. A third rode a current toward the open Pacific with only a few thousand living points remaining. Destoroyah did not interpret the losses as failure. It interpreted them as a boundary. Godzilla's radiation could not be stolen in a flood. It had to be taken in traces, stored in tissue designed to release the energy gradually and protected from the chemistry that made it volatile. Godzilla turned back toward the coast, believing he had broken the infection. Behind him, the remaining clusters gathered around the wrecked submarine and began growing a form with wings. The submarine wreck became a school for survivors. One cluster practiced hiding from heat. Another practiced releasing stored energy in pulses. A third learned to abandon a burning body before the memory signal ended. The swarm did not become fearless. It became less willing to let fear decide the timing of a retreat. The colony's worst mistake, after Godzilla, was not taking too much radiation. It was trying to preserve too much at once. Retreat routes filled with damaged bodies carrying valuable local memories. Sealers did not want to lose any. He slowed withdrawal to collect them. Godzilla collapsed the trench. Rock sealed thousands in. The hive lost more because it refused to leave pieces behind. The lesson arrived brutally. Preservation itself could become greed. In the sealed pocket, surviving clusters had oxygen for minutes. No exit wide enough. Micro-oxygen could open rock, but using enough would destabilize the chamber faster. They sent memory through chemical film along cracks. Slow. Critical data first. Godzilla's attack patterns. Radiation limits. Route map. then shared experience. Local details last. The crack closed under heat before everything crossed. The trapped branch remained aware. Sealers felt it dim. There was no rescue. No clever third option. He could spend the main colony trying to reopen and risk Godzilla finding the survivors. Or leave. He left. The dying pocket did not protest as another mind. It was him. That made the decision no easier. Minutes later, silence. The main colony carried incomplete memory of the branch. Sealers stopped in the submarine wreckage and let the loss exist without immediately turning it into a lesson. The swarm still moved. Processes continued. Hunger resumed at edges. That almost felt obscene. In his first life, the world had continued after people died too. Systems had to. Grief did not justify collapse. But converting death instantly into usefulness could erase the fact that something had been lost. He held a low-activity period. Not ritual. No feeding except maintenance. No new expansion for one tide. The colony simply existed around the submarine wreck. Scavengers entered. Some ate dead shell. Destoroyah let them. Not every fragment needed reclamation. When activity resumed, preservation policy changed. No branch may delay whole retreat solely to save non-critical memory when confirmed overwhelming threat approaches. Harsh. Necessary. But he added another rule beside it. Export memory earlier so emergency abandonment costs less. Do not wait for disaster to decide what matters. That was the real correction. The submarine became a distributed archive site. Stable shell plates stored chemical patterns. Carrier clusters rotated. No single archive complete. If Godzilla destroyed the wreck, other branches held. The colony also practiced deliberate amputation. A test aggregate formed. One section marked compromised. Instead of fighting to repair, it detached immediately. The remaining form rebalanced. Moved. Later reabsorbed healthy parts of detached tissue under safe conditions. A body could let go without wasting everything. This became essential for the flying form. Then the hive tested fear. Atomic breath charge signatures were now so deeply associated with death that some local branches withdrew at weak radiation pulses that posed no threat. Overreaction. Trauma in distributed chemistry. Sealers recognized. He created controlled exposures at safe distance. Not to erase caution. To refine threshold. Low radiation. No retreat after verification. High. Prepare. Known charge pattern. Immediate split. The colony's fear became more precise. That mattered. A system can fail by ignoring danger. It can also fail by spending all its life responding to shadows. By the time the first wing membrane began growing from radiation-fed tissue, Destoroyah had learned more from retreat than from any victory. How to abandon. How to archive. How to preserve fear without worshipping it. How to leave dead material in the ocean when carrying it would kill the living. The flying form began in that restraint. Not ambition alone. It was a body designed around escape routes. Asterisk Chapter 21. Wings over the Pacific Asterisk. The flying form emerged from the submarine trench in pieces. Aggregate bodies rose first, shells unfolding into hooked limbs. Membranes followed, thin and translucent, stretched between hardened plates. The colony did not build a bird. It built a surface that could carry thousands of bodies through air and water at once. The first lift failed. The form fell into the sea and lost half its membrane. The second used heat from a radiation-fed core and climbed above the waves. Destoroyah tasted wind, sunlight, and the chemical thinness of the upper atmosphere. The world became wider and more exposed. Godzilla saw the shadow cross the clouds and turned. His roar reached the flying form before the colony saw him. Atomic fire climbed after it, scorching one wing and sending broken organisms spiraling into the Pacific. The colony reformed while falling. Smaller clusters joined the damaged edge, used the wind to spread the heat, and grew a second membrane from calcium and scavenged plastic. The repair was ugly but functional. Destoroyah did not attack Godzilla directly. It led him over shipping lanes, away from cities, while hidden fragments dropped into ballast water and storm systems. The chase itself became distribution. Below, Monarch tracked one kaiju. Above, the colony divided into 100 future routes. The flying form had not escaped the sea. It had learned how to make the sky part of the hive. Rainfall carried microscopic fragments into islands far from the chase. Some died in sunlight. Others entered tide pools and waited in the shadow of stones. The flying form was already larger than the body visible in the clouds because every escape route had left a seed behind. The first successful flight lasted 47 seconds. The form rose from the Pacific on a thermal column created by its own heated core, climbed high enough for the sea to flatten beneath it, then began losing moisture through the wing membranes faster than the colony had predicted. Every instinct said stay airborne. The calculation said descend. Destoroyah folded one wing and dropped. The impact broke outer plates. It survived. A second test added fluid channels inside the membrane. Flight reached 4 minutes. The third encountered crosswind. One wing twisted enough to tear. The body did not fight the roll. It opened the damaged membrane, let air spill, and used the asymmetry to turn toward the ocean rather than away from it. Controlled failure. Sealers recognized the satisfaction of a system breaking in the direction you had planned. The colony practiced low over waves, where a fall meant water, not stone. Juvenile fragments rode wing edges and released deliberately during turns. Some returned. Some became ocean scouts. The flying form gradually stopped being a single craft and became a mobile distribution platform. That altered how Destoroyah thought about distance. A sea route required current. A flying route could cross current boundaries, islands, shipping lanes, storms. It also exposed the colony to sunlight, dry air, radar, and Godzilla. Every new freedom added new detection. The first aircraft sighting came from a cargo pilot. He saw a translucent red-black shape rise through cloud below the flight path. Not large enough to match the Titans on every news archive. Too large to be bird. He reported. Air traffic control asked for heading. The pilot looked again. The creature had broken apart into 3 smaller shapes. Multiple contacts. Radar showed 1. Then none. The report reached Monarch. Okafor compared wind, humidity, and Godzilla's route. Testing. Holt, now attached as military liaison, said. Or fleeing. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Monarch aircraft were sent at distance. No engagement. Godzilla approached from west. The flying form sensed him before human radar. Destoroyah could descend and hide. He did not. Not yet. He wanted to know whether the form could survive pursuit without turning every escape into a fight. Godzilla surfaced. Roared. The vibration hit the wing membrane hard enough to alter lift. Destoroyah corrected. The Titan followed parallel beneath the water. Not attacking at first. Tracking. The colony changed altitude. Godzilla changed course. Destoroyah banked toward open sea away from coastal population. The decision was strategic and also a test. The colony tested whether Godzilla would chase the visible body or remain focused on the ecological wound. He followed. That meant visible threat could pull attention. Dangerous capability. The colony kept away from cities. If Godzilla's pursuit caused damage, every new human weapon would join. The chase became clean for several minutes. Then Godzilla charged. Dorsal light. Destoroyah split the flying form before breath reached full intensity. The central body dropped. Two membrane sections climbed apart. Atomic fire cut through the gap and vaporized trailing fragments. The main core hit water. Survived. The wing sections lacked enough intelligence to persist alone, but carried instructions. Glide away, release carriers, return if possible. One did. One burned. The colony reassembled, hours later, around a submarine wreck. The form was smaller. Better. The next wings had deliberate break lines. If atomic breath crossed, sections could detach cleanly rather than rip unpredictably. Aerial evolution, borrowed from earlier amputation practice. Godzilla taught. Again. The flight also taught restraint. Several islands below carried dense animal life and fresh water. Easy feeding during recovery. Destoroyah seeded tide pools lightly, but did not establish dead zones. A visible ecological wound would bring Godzilla back before the form recovered. Growth limits became stealth. The colony was learning that not consuming available resources could be as important as finding them. At night, the flying form rose again. Cloud cover. High humidity. No dramatic climb. It followed a cargo lane far enough to map human traffic, then turned before radar response converged. The body landed under rain. 47 seconds had become hours. Not because the colony conquered the sky. Because it learned when to leave it. A storm gave the flying form its first experience with lightning. The body climbed into a cloud because humidity solved membrane loss. Electrical charge built along the wing edges. Destoroyah sensed it too late. A bolt struck. Half the right membrane flashed white. The colony lost local coordination and dropped. No Godzilla. No weapon. Weather. The surviving core released, charged out of tissue before current reached deeper memory. Falling fragments hit ocean smoking. The main body recovered meters above waves. Sealers had spent so much attention on enemies that the sky reminded him environment remained capable of killing without intent. The next flying form grew conductive channels deliberately routed towards sacrificial tips. A crude lightning path. During another storm, charge bled into the sea with less damage. The adaptation did not make lightning harmless. It made failure direction known. Monarch pilots later observed the creature choosing storm edges rather than storm centers despite high humidity. Okafor wrote, "It balances competing environmental risks." Holt answered, "Everything alive does." Exactly. The more they studied Destoroyah, the less useful it became to separate monster intelligence from ordinary survival principles. Scale changed consequences, not fundamentals. Asterisk Chapter 22, The Chase That Divided. Godzilla pursued the flying form across the Pacific with the persistence of a force that did not need sleep. Each time the colony descended to feed, the Titan arrived. Each time it rose, his dorsal plates brightened beneath it. Monarch's aircraft could not stay between them. The pilots recorded radiation storms, dead fish falling from the clouds, and pieces of translucent shell striking the ocean like hail. Analysts tried to predict the flight path and found 3 paths where the swarm appeared to have one body. Destoroyah used the chase to test division. Some fragments became decoys. Others rode the wake of cargo ships. A few entered floating plastic and waited. The main flying form remained visible because Godzilla followed what he could see. When atomic breath clipped the left membrane, the form rolled instead of resisting. Bodies poured from the wound, rejoined along the right wing, and changed the center of mass. The move saved the colony but left the airframe slower. Godzilla's next strike nearly ended it. Fire burned through the core and scattered the mind across rain, spray, and dead birds. For 11 seconds, Destoroyah had no single decision. Then chemical signals met in the storm and the hive returned. The colony learned something more valuable than speed. Separation could preserve thought, but only if fragments retained a route back. The next journey would need a vehicle, a protected current, and a destination large enough to feed an entire new body. Monarch's pilots watched the storm and realized that the creature's flight path was not random. It was selecting shipping lanes, ballast currents, and rain bands. A senior analyst marked the routes on a globe and found that the swarm was not fleeing Godzilla. It was choosing where the world would meet it next. The Pacific chase fractured the hive's sense of here. A carrier inside ballast water was 300 kilometers from the flying form. A tide pool cluster sat on an island the main body had already left behind. Microscopic debris traveled inside a storm front. The main aerial core remained under Godzilla's attention. All were Destoroyah. Their experience no longer arrived at the same speed. One island cluster learned that sunlight killed exposed juveniles within minutes. The flying form did not receive that lesson until after a membrane section repeated the mistake over open sea. 2 branches learned the same fact separately, paying twice. The cost pushed sealers toward a new network. Environmental beacons. Not radio in the human sense. Biochemical markers left at recurrent routes, small living relays whose only job was exchange memory with passing carriers. Cloud water. Buoys. Ship hull biofilm. Storm drains. The ocean began acquiring invisible nodes. Each node weak. Disposable. Together, they shortened the time between experiences. Monarch found one by accident. A research buoy that should have been clean developed a thin shell film around an oxygen sensor. The film did not spread aggressively. It persisted. Whenever tagged water samples from known dead zones passed near, the film changed chemical output. Okafor stared. Relay. The technician said. How would it know? Contact. Then it's just contamination. Contamination that keeps waiting in one place. They removed the film. Another appeared on a second buoy days later. Not same location. Network behavior. Monarch began disinfecting buoys. Destoroyah changed relay sites to less obvious human surfaces. Every move became an arms race of attention. The chase itself also became a problem for human shipping. Godzilla crossed routes without concern for schedules. Ports issued warnings. Cargo vessels altered course. The flying form saw those diversions from above. Human traffic behaved like schooling fish around a predator. Shipping lanes were not fixed roads. They were decisions around risk. The colony could manipulate them by being seen. Again, capability. Again, temptation. A visible form near one route could redirect ships into another where hidden carriers waited. Destoroyah tested once with an empty autonomous cargo barge, selected by vibration, and no human heat signatures. The flying form crossed its route visibly. Control changed heading. The barge entered alternate lane. Hidden carriers attached. Success. Sealers marked the method. He did not repeat on passenger traffic. The ability to steer human movement by fear felt too close to Pelago's executives moving danger zones on a map. Different body. Same structural power. He stored the discomfort beside the capability. Godzilla nearly ended the experiment when he attacked from below. The Titan had learned the flying form's usual low-altitude recovery. This time he submerged ahead, waited, and surfaced under the flight path. The pressure columns struck before atomic breath. Destoroyah's left wing folded. The body tumbled. A human pilot would have fought for level. The colony broke apart. Hundreds of fragments became different drag surfaces. Some fell. Some rode the blast upward. The core entered rain cloud. Godzilla fired through it. Water flashed steam. The colony lost coherent signals for 11 seconds. That gap terrified sealers more than physical death. There was no central awareness. Only branches. Then relays reconnected. Not all. Enough. The mind returned from fragments. Sealers realized identity had become partly network topology. If communication disappeared, no one piece necessarily held the whole present self. The critical memory anchors kept continuity. But current intention could fracture. He established reconnection priority after separation. First, identify surviving branches. Second, exchange latest state. Third, reconcile conflicting commands before major action. No branch should launch an irreversible attack during reconnection unless immediate survival required. The next force split proved the rule. Two branches rejoined with conflicting local plans. One wanted descend, one climb. Instead of tearing the body between impulses, they paused in glide and reconciled through pressure signals. Descend won, because moisture loss was worse than threat below. The body landed. Survived. Monarch aircraft watching recorded what looked like hesitation. Okafor said, "It's deciding." Holt answered, "Oh, glitching." Decision can look like a glitch when you only see the pause. The sentence went in her private notes. Destoroyah would never read it. He experienced the pause as the price of remaining one mind across many bodies. Speed was not always intelligence. Sometimes intelligence was waiting long enough for yourself to agree. One relay branch refused to reconnect after the 11-second fracture. It had survived inside a rain band, carried local memory, and then continued west instead of returning toward the flying form. Sealers felt it as a distant absence and then a weak signal. The branch might have been lost entirely. It might instead have been damaged but recoverable. A third possibility was that the isolated branch had chosen a locally better route. The hive's principle allowed local survival decisions. But a branch holding shared memory could not simply disappear forever without consequence. Destoroyah sent no command to force return. He sent a carrier request. Status. The branch answered through a buoy relay days later. Stable. Low biomass. New island habitat. No threat. It had found a productive tide pool network and chosen to establish. The main hive accepted. A new colony node had formed through deviation. This was the upside of decentralization. The downside arrived months later when the island branch began expanding faster than surface policy allowed. No Godzilla nearby initially. Local abundance. The main network sent updated ecological limits. The island branch slowed after receiving. not obedience to a central ruler, so much as reconciliation with shared priorities. Sealers understood the distinction was fragile. If local branches could never disagree, distribution was theater. If shared priorities could never constrain, the hive would splinter into incompatible Destorias. Identity required negotiation across itself. The island branch remained. Its local forms developed brighter shells from mineral conditions. The main colony did not overwrite. Difference allowed. Shared boundaries retained. A swarm that could survive becoming diverse without becoming separate enemies was more resilient than one copied perfectly. The lesson would matter when surface and hollow earth branches spent longer periods apart. Chapter 23. A ride inside the storm. The HEAV infiltration almost ended when technician Owen Price found the organism in the emergency tank. He raised a wrench. The pale body split around the first strike. Price swore and lifted again. Pilot Jenna Ruiz caught his arm. Stop hitting the water. It moved. I can see that. It split. I can see that too. The two halves clung to opposite sides of the tank. Ruiz opened a Monarch emergency channel. Possible contamination inside cabin water. The reply took 12 seconds. Price stared at the creatures. They're not coming at us. No. Why? Ruiz looked at the sealed Titan sample case 3 meters away. One organism turned toward its warming unit. They want something else. Monarch instructed isolate tank, no direct contact, maintain flight if vehicle systems stable. Price laughed sharply. Maintain flight with the thing eating harbors in our drinking water. Ruiz looked at fuel. Route. The conv behind them. Landing site ahead. Turning back would take them through evacuated zone and potentially seed a different facility. Forward move toward a deep earth staging site designed for hazardous Titan material. No good option. She chose forward. Destoroyah felt the decision through cabin vibrations and learned another human pattern. People under pressure often chose the route with infrastructure built for danger, even if danger had not been planned there. The HEAV became a bridge because humans trusted their own specialized sites. The colony did not attack the crew. Price sealed the tank inside a secondary case. Destoroyah allowed. Being contained inside a moving vehicle served his route. Sealers recognized the strategic inversion. Sometimes a cage moves you somewhere useful. The colony sampled the Titan case only through external residue. No breach. The material carried unfamiliar radiation. Old bone. Hollow earth signature. The signal was enormous compared with ordinary cargo. Destoroyah could open the case. Doing so might trigger emergency landing or kill crew. He left it. Information from the exterior was enough to know a new environment existed. Price watched the sample remain near one side of the tank. Is it looking at the case? Ruiz said. It doesn't have eyes. Neither do mold spores. I don't worry about mold staring. A third crew member, analyst Nia Brooks, pulled up restricted briefings. Her access was limited. Enough. Distributed intelligence suspected. Price looked at her. You knew. Not confirmed. That phrase should be illegal. Ruiz said. Focus. They improvised observation. No experiments. Just record. When the HEAV banked, the organisms corrected. When power to the Titan case cycled, they moved. When Ruiz deliberately shut the warming unit for maintenance, the bodies dispersed. Brooks whispered, They're mapping us. Price answered. We're mapping them. Nobody laughed. The conv entered the deep Earth access region. Gravity anomalies began affecting instruments. The sample changed. It pressed flat to tank walls during one shift before human warning systems triggered. Ruiz saw. Can it feel the transition? Brooks recorded time. The organisms had become an unplanned early warning sensor. Price nearly asked whether they could use that. Stopped. Apex would. Monarch might. The ethical question felt immediate now that the instrument was choosing not to attack them. The access shaft opened. The HEAV descended. Price stayed away from the water. At one violent gravity change, the secondary case broke loose. He grabbed it before it struck Brooks. The container cracked. Water spilled over his gloves. A colony body touched the wet fabric. Destoroyah tasted human skin chemistry through material. There was no blood and no wound beneath the wet fabric. Stress compounds. The body withdrew rather than dissolving. Price froze. It could have burned him. He knew because he'd read injury reports. It did not. Ruiz shouted for him to secure. He did. No one discussed the contact until after landing. Price wrote in his incident statement, organism contacted my glove and withdrew without visible damage. Command later asked whether he had imagined due stress. Ruiz confirmed. Brooks confirmed. 3 witnesses. The statement survived editing. When the tank ruptured on impact later, Destoroyah entered hollow Earth. Price escaped with the crew. For years afterward, he would tell people the most frightening moment was not seeing the creature split. It was feeling something capable of dissolving steel touch his hand and choose not to. The Monarch debrief began before the HEAV crew had finished changing out of pressure suits. Ruiz sat under white lights with damp hair and a paper cup she never drank from. Price kept flexing the hand the organism had touched. Brooks had 3 screens open and refused to let the incident recorder summarize for her. The first officer asked whether the organism had attacked. Price said it dissolved the tank seal. The officer looked down. That is not what I asked. Price's jaw tightened. Ruiz answered instead, no direct attack on crew. Could it have? Nobody in the room could prove intent. Brooks pulled up the glove photograph. The fabric showed salt, damaged sealant, and a clear wet patch where one colony body had pressed against Price before withdrawing. It had contact, she said. We have injuries from less exposure in other incidents. A security liaison leaned forward. You're suggesting restraint. I'm describing an outcome. That distinction kept the statement intact. Monarch's first internal draft called the contact anomalous non-aggression. Brooks rejected the phrase because it made the absence of injury sound like a malfunction. Ruiz rejected deliberate mercy because that claimed motive they did not have. Price wanted the report to say it chose not to burn him. They settled on the ugly version. Physical contact occurred without observed tissue or equipment damage. The organism withdrew before the subject moved away. Price hated it. It survived review. Okafor joined by secure link halfway through. She asked for cabin telemetry rather than opinions. Gravity shifts. Tank temperature. Titan sample power state. Crew movement. The organisms had flattened against the tank 14 seconds before the HEAV's first gravity warning. They had shifted toward the Titan case whenever its warmer cycled. They had dispersed when Ruiz shut the unit down. Price stared at the plot. It knew before we did. Okafor said, it reacted before our instruments classified the transition. That is not the same thing. You people really hate verbs. I hate verbs that pretend we know the mind behind them. Price looked at his glove again. That answer was fair. The more dangerous discussion started when an apex observer asked whether the organism's early response could be replicated as a detector. Ruiz's expression changed. You mean put one in a tank on purpose? Controlled biological sensor. Brooks laughed once.